Yashodanandana Brajajana Ranjana Yashodanandana Brajajana Ranjana Yamuna Tira Vanachari Yamuna Tira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Jai Om Vishnupad Paramahansa Paravachakacharya Shishipad Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Jai Ananta Koti Vaishnavini Ki Jai Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur Jai Om Shri Kaho Shri Krishna Chaitanya Radha Vasani Gaur Bhakti Shri Radha Krishna Jai Mukunda Radha Kundi Jai Shri Vrindavan Dham Ki Jai Shri Navadvip Dham Ki Jai Shri Ganga Mai Ki Jai Jamuna Mai Ki Jai Bhakti Devi Ki Jai Srimati Tulsi Devi Ki Jai Samaveda Bhaktivinoda Ki Jai Gaur Premananda Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Narayanam Namaskritya
Naram Namaskritya.
Naram Chaiva Narottamam
Naram Chaiva Narottamam.
Devim Saraswatim Vyasam
Devim Saraswati Vyasam.
Tato Jayam Adhiraye
Jayam Niraye.
Nasta Prayeshu Abhadreshu
Nashtaprayeshu Bhadreshu.
Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya
Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya.
Bhagavad Uttama Shloke
Bhagavad Gita Shloke.
Bhaktir Bhavati Naishtaki
Bhaktir Bhavati Naishtiki.
Namo Vishnupadaya Krishna Preshtaya Mutale Vedanta Swami Namane Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pracharani Nirvishesha Shundvani Pashyati Deshata. We're going to do a little different format than normal format that we all do. We're just going to present our sort of prepared talks rather than going through the Bhagavatam verses that we're going through. First of all, I'd like to ask, is anyone studying Sanskrit here? This has nothing to do with the talk. Okay. Well, I was just going to suggest, if anyone is, you can learn a little Sanskrit by learning the meanings, or carefully learning the meanings according to the Sanskrit grammar and according to the words, by studying all these songs, the samsara prayers. When I was first learning Sanskrit, I found that very useful. Samsara prayers. That's the Guru Vasa, the 8 prayers for the Guru, and all of these verses that we sing. It's a very natural way to learn Sanskrit because we chant so many songs and verses in Sanskrit. What's the time? 8:30. Including verses, yeah. So I'm going to speak on this book. I've written a few books on Vedic culture and the environment. I spoke on Friday. I gave sort of an introduction to this book on Friday. I'll just give a review. First of all, Vedic culture and the environment. First of all, in discussing the two, one has to discard all of the, and this is the solution. The solution to environmental issues is Vedic culture. So the first thing that's required is to put aside modern political and technological solutions. These are components, major components, as far as the solution is concerned, of modern global culture. So the first point, I'll make 2 points and then go right into what I'm presenting as the solution. So the first point, this concept is based on overconsumption is the root problem. There's a popular mantra that is used in environmental circles and by the government, by the EPA, and that's reduce, recycle, and reuse. It's the 3 R's. So there's a lot of discussion about reusing. In the fashion industry, people are very proud of reusing old fashions and things like this. Recycling, everybody knows about recycling. Reduction is more difficult. This is the most difficult, and according to the EPA, is considered to be the most important. And that's what I'm presenting here. Calling it overconsumption, the opposite of reduction, obviously, overconsumption. In moral terms, you could say moral terms, it's greed. Overconsumption is greed, or lobha in Sanskrit. And so this is what I first established in the book. Then the next section discusses modern culture and how modern culture is addressing overconsumption. What are the components of modern culture? Science and technology, democracy, capitalism, socialism, humanism, as opposed to humanism tries to minimize religion and any form of the higher power. So these various components of modern culture, these are really the underpinnings of modern culture. And I'm very critical of these things and explain in practical terms how really none of these does an adequate job in minimizing overconsumption. And as a matter of fact, some of them contribute to consumption. For example, our economy for some 150 years has been based on it's called the consumer economy. So you can imagine consumer economy indicates that there might be overconsumption, which there is. So now I'm going to get down to these 4 aspects of Vedic culture that I'm presenting as the solution. The first, and I'm going to say this in sort of devotee terms, or what we're accustomed to reading in the Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam. First is understanding that all beings are spirit soul. What is that one? Vinaya Sampanne Brahmane Gavihastani. What's the first word of that? Vidya Vinaya Sampanne Brahmane Gavihastani. Shunichaiva Sabhakicha. That means that the Pandita Samadarshana, the Pandit or the learned person sees Samadarshan. He has an equal vision. Sama means equal, darshan means vision. So he has an equal vision of all beings, all living beings. That's the first one. Second one is Sankirtan, or celebration, what I'm calling in the book, because I use modern language. I try not to use any of our sort of jargon or minimize Sanskrit. Second one is Sankirtan, or that's celebration of Leelas and Namas, celebration of Krishna's Leelas, Vishnu's Leelas, and names. Third one is an agrarian economy, which really corresponds to our concept of Varna. Varna means the different classes. Probably most of you have heard of Varnashram Dharma. So there's 4 Varnas and 4 ashrams. The fourth one corresponds to ashrama. Ashrama means that you, that's a wake up. You could stand up after a few minutes. The fourth one is ashrama. That means tolerance and austerity. But beyond tolerance and austerity, it means becoming detached from material life and attached to spiritual life, or liberation. So now I'm going to re-emphasize 3 of those. Well, let me say, first of all, the first one is spirit soul, seeing all souls equally. Now, some commentators say that with the advent of Christianity and perhaps the Semitic religion, the Abrahamic religions, Christianity, Islam, and Judaism, this idea of the nature is animated by the life force, living force, or soul. So this erosion of the idea that nature contains life force, just like our life force, it erodes the barrier between humans and nature. So if there is this concept that there's reverence for life in all beings, then it constructs a barrier. That's one concept. It also, you could say, it paves a path. It introduces a path to a higher realization, this Samadarshan, Pandita Samadarshan. So that's the first one. Second one is celebration of Leelas and Namas, or Sankirtan. There are 2 concepts associated with this. One is that enjoyment. This is what introduces enjoyment. You can say spiritual enjoyment, but in this book, I prefer not to use the word spiritual because it's a cultural, social cultural concept. So the idea of celebration of Leelas and Namas introduces a cultural enjoyment. So if you study Vedic culture, or if you go to India or any country, Mexico, any country that they enjoy these Catholic celebrations of Christ's, you could say Leelas, his whatever it is. I'm not Catholic, but 7 stations, something like that, of the cross. So this concept of Leela and Nama, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu says, Anandambuddhi Vartanam. It gives enjoyment. It's not just a spiritual concept, it's social. So there are many aspects of you could say that the Vedic culture is a Leela culture. Bhaktisiddhanta Prabhupada, Vilas Prabhu reminded me that Bhaktisiddhanta Prabhu calls it Avatar Vad. Vad means like a school or doctrine of avatar. So this is our culture, Leela culture. And Leelas are there in drama, dance, art. See all this. Lord Nrsimha, this is a Leela of Nrsimhadev. Leela of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu here in the back. This is also Leela, Chaitanya Nitai. All these different Leelas we're worshiping. Lord Nrsimha. So all these are temple and home worship. Some people worship Radha Krishna, some people worship Bal Krishna. So these represent different Leelas. And the names also, many of the names, perhaps not all, but many of the names, like we had in this prayer, Jaya Radha Madhava. It starts Jaya, all glories to Radha Madhava, Yashoda Nandana. So Yashoda Nandana is a name for Krishna, but it's also a Leela, indicates that he is the son of Yashoda. So all these names are interrelated with Leelas. So this is enjoyment. This is what is meant to provide enjoyment for individuals and for society. That was fast. 15 minutes already. So, Leela culture. It's also a yajna, Sankirtan yajna. Now, I'm not going to get into yajna. That could be a whole course, many lectures or much discussion. Yajna is really at the core of since the ancient Vedas. The ancient Vedas are based on sacrifice, yajna, mostly to the devatas, to the demigods. But yajna is really the essence of Vedic culture, of Vedic society. If you read Manu Samhita, Manu, or it's called Dharma Shastra, if you read that, you see that all Brahmins have to perform yajna. So we have in this age Sankirtan yajna, which is celebration of Leelas and Namas. And of course, as we follow Chaitanya, Nama is the most important. But nevertheless, Leela, Rath Yatra is a celebration of Leela. So that's number 2. Number 3, and I'll go quickly because I have a tendency to cut into Vilas' time. And he always said, no, it's all right. So number 3 is agrarian economy. And we could see that the Vedic culture, even today, 50% in India, 50% of the population lives in rural areas, whereas in Western countries or many other countries, European, American, Australian countries, the population in rural areas is much, much lower. Sometimes as low as 5, 10, 15%. So, and Vedic culture, of course, really the hub of the economy is agrarian, and it's not centralized as it is today in business and cities, industry, technology, services. That's the natural economy, agrarian economy. And we attempt around the world to establish farms. Like there are farms here locally. Devotees have farms, and famous farms are like Eco Village. Radhanath Swami has this Eco Village near Bombay, and many others, Shivaram Swami in Hungary. Number 4, which I think is one of the most beautiful aspects of the Varnashram system, is the ashram system, which it means that Brahmachari Grihastha Vanaprastha Sannyasa it urges society to become detached from material life and attached to liberation, to pursuing liberation. Liberation meaning liberation from this material world. So this concept really is not there in other traditional societies. If you look at traditional societies around the world, even old European society, Egyptian, Asian, you'll see social structure, like similar to Varnas, but the ashramas are generally absent, not as sophisticated as in the Vedic system. So this is a wonderful influence in society. So again, these three active components that Vedic society presents as environmental solutions. One is this celebration of Vilas, providing enjoyment and providing yajna. Yajna is our argument. I won't go into detail. Yajna is our argument against veganism. Vegan means reducing violence to animals. But within the Dharma Shastra, we learned that there's always violence. And the way to reduce that violence is yajna. Yajna is an atonement. It establishes a relationship. And as we know through Sankirtan Yajna, especially if you read Shikshastra, it provides a transcendental connection to Krishna. And then this agrarian economy and this fourth ashrama, brahmachari, grihastha, vanaprastha. This is a powerful influence in society, encouraging society to reduce consumption. What society has this? So, Rupa said, if somebody doesn't have questions, then I have to ask them questions. Oh, good, we have a question.
Hare Krishna. I was just wondering, the argument about veganism, if we're to say that yajna is the argument against veganism because of the non-violence, then wouldn't someone be able to use that argument to say that we don't need to be vegetarian?
We're not vegetarian. What?
She's saying, could you use the same argument to say that we don't need to be vegetarian?
Yes, exactly. We could. And we're not vegetarian. We eat the remnants of yajna. And those remnants could be meat, but not in this age, not in the age of Kali. So all we can read in the Bhagavatam. In the Bhagavatam, there's a verse that says, those who offer meat in yajna. Anyway, without going into detail, it says that these people are they're mistaken, I guess we can say. So in the Vedic times, yes, meat was offered in yajna, but not in this age, because there's no one who can offer. But there are other Buddhists and Jains. They broke away from this concept of yajna. They still have sometimes yajna, but the traditional Vedic concept is really focused on yajna. I don't want to get too much into this argument. It's very controversial, and I don't want to offend any vegans. Certainly, I have a family member who's a vegan. So this is not being recorded, is it? So these are private talks. Maybe I'll say something offensive. I do. I speak sometimes in hyperbole. Rupa tries to hurt me, but little hyperbole or a little strongly. But if I ever speak to somebody directly, like a vegan or a humanist, somebody I disagree with, I'm much more polite. In a class like this. So, okay, so no questions. So we have to ask questions. Yes.
Hare Krishna. In regards to the agrarian economy,
Yes.
I'm wondering if it is even possible to base one's entire economic foundation on agrarian produce and things like that in this age of mass farming and purely commercial farms who are using so many like unscrupulous methods to produce their crops in like vast swaths of land. Like, how can we do that in our life, and is it possible?
Yes, well, certainly not possible in my life, but you're absolutely correct. It's not possible. It's immediately. It's something that requires, would definitely require time. So, of course, Prabhupada has spoken about this. He was, as you'll see from these verses, I read through these verses that we're supposed to be covered today, 1:11, verse 11 through 15. So verse 12 in the purport, Prabhupada says that he speaks against mills and factories and this kind of thing. So he often speaks like that, and he wanted these farms established. But as far as establishing, I mean, the ultimate goal would be to establish an agrarian economy. You're absolutely correct. An agrarian economy would be extremely difficult. According to the history, about 1,000 years ago, the Europeans felt very competitive with Arabs. They were getting a lot of their imports from Arabs, and Europeans started to develop their ships, and they eventually, another 500 years later, they started to colonize the world. They had excellent ships and improved navies and armies, and they were going around conquering everyone. And what they started to do, many in ancient history also, the tendency is to produce a big agriculture, almost like you could say agribusiness, according to the technology of the times. So big tea plantations, big whatever plantations they whatever they wanted to produce. So they would produce that in India or China, and then they'd bring it to Europe. So this has been going on for 500 years. And then, of course, it was accelerated like anything about 200 years ago with the advent of the scientific revolution, technology, industry, starting about mid-1800s. So it's so much ingrained with the spread of the culture. And then once the colonization was released in the mid-20th century, colonies no longer existed. Everyone rushed in to take part in this non-agrarian economy, the agribusiness, or it's not agrarian. Agrarian meaning in this use, some agrarian means various things to various people, but I'm using it in the sense of locally produced agricultural products and cloth and shelter, things like that. So it's been this agrarian kind of economy. It's no country has an agrarian economy or even a significant agrarian portion of their economy. They have agriculture, but not agrarian. So to reestablish it is a big task. But we have a responsibility as Prabhupada followers to attempt to do that. We have various gurus and prominent disciples who are trying to make inroads in that direction. And there are countries that do have a fair amount of agrarian type activity. India is still one of them. So those can be used as models. And we don't know what kind of future holds. Maybe somebody will drop a big atomic bomb and there will no longer be, what is it? Somebody was saying it's like EMT or something, electromagnetic. Yeah, EMP, yeah. Takes out all the technology, and I don't know, you can no longer drive tractors. Some people need to introduce oxen again or something like that. Mules. So we have really no idea about the future. And I've seen in my life, I was in one revolution in Iran in 1979, And these kinds of changes, just like the pandemic, we've all lived through the pandemic, these kinds of events can happen very quickly, just almost overnight. All of a sudden you hear, oh, there seems to be this disturbance about this virus, and then everyone just goes crazy about this one thing, virus or revolution. There may be some riots, some discontent, a few riots here and there. You think, oh, okay, well, this is ordinary. People sometimes do this kind of thing. And then all of a sudden the government changes. So it can happen. An earthquake, a volcano. So yes, in answer to your question, long answer, sorry, short question, long answer. But you're absolutely right. Just for us to do it by force or by expecting some short-term change, it seems unlikely. But here we are, this small group here, and we can have a change, a large change in society. It's not unrealistic. I mean, many small groups have expanded into much larger groups. This is why I'm trying to present this book as a service to you. I'm handing this out free. If it works, it works. If not, then it doesn't work. But this is kind of a bridge preaching. Like you may have heard that some devotees use yoga, that they introduce bhakti yoga through hatha yoga and other kinds of what I would call bridge preaching. Some in ISKCON, it's commonly, that name is commonly. So this is a kind of bridge preaching through the environment, saying that this is a cultural revolution is needed, not violent, but a cultural revolution, not a spiritual revolution. It's a cultural revolution. And we have the correct solution to environmental issues. And the people who use who go to these, whatever, COP29, COP38, these different conferences, Greta Thunberg's out there demonstrating for her liberal solutions that we have to pass laws against coal consumption. All these things are shallow. And we know they're shallow because every time they have one, they haven't done what the previous one's done. Now Trump is saying get rid of the Paris Accords. So I'm not blaming Trump. When Biden came back from his thing in Glasgow, then whoever his name is from West Virginia dragged his feet because they produce coal in West Virginia. And then India says, no, we don't want to reduce coal. We're not having you tell us how to conduct our affairs. You guys are the ones who created the problems. So why should we do what you say? So all of these are superficial solutions. Political solutions just produce argumentation and delay, procrastinate. Technological solutions, they're all unproven on a large scale, maybe in a laboratory or on a small scale. This solution works. How do we know? Because the culture has been operating for thousands of years, and we can observe how it worked and how it still works, even though it's somewhat degraded. So again, this is my gift to the preachers. I hope that it will be effective in expanding our numbers. That's the only purpose for this. Otherwise, I can just sleep. Is that what you do? More questions? I guess I've way exceeded my time. So Vilas will.
You messed up. I my thumb.
Okay, what about this one? Okay. It's going to be presenting two books. This is called Babaji Maharaj. This is on the two Babajis, Gorkishore Das Babaji and Jagannath Das Babaji. It's a wonderful book. Rupa Vilas Prabhu is an expert on the Sampradaya. He's, for more than 30 years, since the 80s, he's been studying, of course, as a devotee. He's been a devotee since the early 70s. But so, of course, he knows about the parampara, but he's focused since the 80s on this topic and written many books. He's written, I think, 5 books on Prabhupada. This is on Prabhupada, called Without Fear, because Prabhupada's name is Abhay. So Without Fear, and this is his, not the latest book, but this is the next to latest, the Babaji Maharaj, about the 2 Babajis, and he's written on Namacharya, Haridas Thakur, aside from these acharyas here, Haridas Thakur, he's written the 7th Goswami about Bhaktivinoda Thakur, he's written Raya Vishnu about Bhakti Siddhanta Prabhupada. So really an expert, and I'm committing a great offense by giving him only 10 minutes to speak. Okay, yes, sir.
Well, just briefly, this has to be brief. Just before I left, I've been living in England for the last few years, and I started in Tallahassee, but first joined the movement in Tallahassee in '71. And a friend of mine there near London had an argument with a prominent sannyasi whose name I won't mention to protect the innocent. No, it's anyway, the argument was that he was making the argument, the sannyasi was making the argument that his relationship with Prabhupada was one that he established through Prabhupada's books, which it sounds like a pretty solid argument. But his objection, or his idea, was no, we join movements or become part of a movement because of a person, because of persons, not just books. Even though the books may be very profound and deep in wisdom, still we join because some person impressed us with their qualities. So he felt that the better proposal was first learn about Prabhupada through books written about Prabhupada by persons who knew him, who experienced his beautiful qualities and characteristics. Get to know Prabhupada first. Now I take that a step further by saying it's good that we know about our entire lineage, that profoundly represented here on the altar, where you see, I could say, the big 5, the all-stars, or whatever you want to say. They're very prominent, and to know about them is to understand more deeply what Prabhupada has come and to present. This teaching that's so many thousands of years old and passed down through succession. That's our system, Guru Parampara. And so to understand not only their lives, but their teachings, their examples, their compassion, their behavior, everything, to understand them deeply, then it makes it a much easier entry into Prabhupada's books. You understand there's persons that you need to get to know. So that's been my focus. Actually, it's my focus for about 40 years. Yeah, that's true. So I'm just going to read a couple of excerpts that I thought you might like. This is a chapter from this book, Babaji Maharaj. It's called The Sharp Words of the Sadhu. So I'll summarize part of it. This person came to hear Gorkishore speak, and he spoke very strongly against pretense and sort of false behavior. And so he said the speaker went away. He was very upset. The seeker, sorry, not the speaker. The seeker who was asking questions to Shore. He went away because he felt that he was upset by the words of Shore. So then the seeker came again, finally to meet with him, and said, I thought it better to reside in a secluded place and perform my own individual worship than to become disturbed by hearing the sharp words of the sadhu. Babaji Maharaj replied, please take note that those sadhus who speak sharp words to drive away the witch of the illusory energy are actually the only real devotees of Krishna and friends of the living entities. The conditioned living being experiences the distressful quarreling of his wife and close relatives and is rudely treated by them until death. Yet he never desires to leave their association. On the other hand, he absorbs himself in trying to appease and serve them. But when a devotee of the Lord, who is always desirous of the living entity's ultimate welfare, chides him just once with instructions meant to drive away Maya, then that conditioned entity immediately makes plans to leave the saintly person for his entire life. If you actually want to perform devotional service properly, then you must accept the harsh language of the sadhu as the medicine by which Maya can be given up. By this, one can obtain the necessary spiritual advancement to successfully chant the holy name. So this is an interesting instruction by Shore, and how one has to accept the strong language of the spiritual master. Prabhupada many times spoke very strongly and upset plenty of people who heard his message. Didn't appreciate it, but this is the business of a sadhu to speak like this. Just to amplify this point, there's also a little section by Bhaktisiddhanta speaking about the sharp words of the sadhu. He says, there is no doubt that the words of the sadhu possess the power of destroying the evil propensities of one's mind. The sadhus in this way benefit everyone who associates with them. There are many things which we do not disclose to the sadhu. The real sadhu makes us speak out what we keep concealed in our hearts. He then applies the knife. The very word sadhu has no meaning other than this. He stands in front of the block with the uplifted sacrificial knife in his hand. The sensuous desires of men are like goats. The sadhu stands there to kill those desires by the merciful stroke of the keen edge of the sacrificial knife in the form of unpleasant language. If the sadhu turns into my flatterer, then he does me harm. He becomes my enemy. If he gives us flattery, then we are led to the road that brings enjoyment, but no real well-being. So this is a combination of Bhaktisiddhanta's and Shore's instruction on the powerful words of a sadhu. So I have 2 minutes on time. Oh, is breakfast? Okay, I'll read a couple of the short ones. This is this took place in Dallas in 74 or 5, 4, I think 4. It's 1970, a long time ago, before you were born. But there are lots. Probably a very powerful lecture on the section of Chaitanya Charitamrita where he talks about the Madan Mohan, the deity, and the relationship of Krishnadas Kaviraj with this deity. It was a very, almost not an emotional lecture, but a very evocative kind of lecture, powerful. And at the end, my godbrother, my old friend, Ganagamya Das, he asked Prabhupada a nice question. He said, how can we repay you? Which is an interesting question to ask a spiritual master, but it's a practical one. You've given us so much in the form of knowledge and association. How can we repay you? So Prabhupada was almost, you got the feeling he was almost embarrassed by the question. And somebody said, you don't require to repay. And he chuckled. I am not giving you anything. It is Krishna's property. You repay to Krishna. Chant Hare Krishna, and he will be repaid. Nobody can repay that. Therefore, it is better to remain always obliged. That's all. So this is the mood of a great saintly person, Prabhupada, and all of them to this beautiful sampradaya. I just think I've so much admired that. I've never seen this before, actually, and I was really impressed by it. They deserve to be so prominent in our lives, all these great acharyas, and to know them and to know their hearts and their teaching as far as possible. It gives us a real sense of being connected to something that's profound, ancient, profound. You know, it's important to get to know these personalities as far as possible. So that was Prabhupada's response. And I'm going to close by reading one more thing. And go just a little over time, but this is very nice. This is a poem written by my godbrother, who is in many ways responsible for me coming to this movement. Because he was a college professor, and he studied all the great poets of both England and the U.S., and he was very familiar with their poetry, and he was also a bit of a poet himself. So this one he wrote specifically about Prabhupada. So this is a poem glorifying Prabhupada. So I'll close with that. Okay. May my mind seek, his name is Hayagriva Das. You probably read about him in the biography. So. May my mind seek the shelter of him whose lotus feet destroy kalpas of sin, whose feet are garlanded with flowers, whose feet are eternally auspicious, whose feet traverse the three worlds, whose feet dance to 1,000 drums, whose feet appear to me in dreams, whose feet I unworthy touch. May my mind seek the service of him whose hand electric awakens me to life, whose hand points out the Vedic open road, whose hand opens the ancient sacred books, whose hand writes absolute and golden words, whose hands beats the mridungas of Bengal, whose hand plays shining cymbals to the Lord, whose hand counts prayers upon 1,000,000 beads, whose hand benedicts and fills the empty heart, whose hand soweth unknown seeds in the soul, whose hand gathereth the fruits, whose hand bestoweth copious gifts, whose hand is a hand of fire, whose hand pats my head as I weep. May my mind seek the mercy of him whose eyes are great springs of compassion, whose eyes see him behind materials, whose eyes strike the flame of devotion, whose eyes sparkle kindly with wisdom, whose eyes are the eyes of a child, whose eyes survey all in eternity, whose eyes are the sun and the moon, whose eyes close in rapt meditation, whose eyes have beheld the great God, whose eyes are the soul and the self. May my mind seek the presence of him whose voice now disturbs, sorry, a little hoarse, whose voice, may my mind seek the presence of him, whose voice now disturbs my long sleeping, whose voice calls the true names of youth, whose voice chastises the demons, whose voice answers all yet is silent, whose voice chokes with longing and love, whose voice sings the mantras of praise, whose voice summons cows in Goloka, whose voice Krishna and Radha must know, whose voice I will hear at my death. May my mind seek the vision of him, whose smile spreads a blissful effulgence, whose smile conquers legions of skeptics, whose smile uproots the weeds of my doubt, whose smile lightens the burdens of Kali, whose smile is worth the tears of my endless migrations, whose smile severs the tree with its roots above, whose smile dissolves my pride and illusion, whose smile is a downpour of mercy, whose smile extinguishes the blazing fire of samsara, whose smile draws nectar from the bright seas of knowledge, whose smile amidst two armies speaks to my battle-worn self. I don't know if we have any time for questions. If you have any. Yeah, go ahead.
Yesterday I went to a Alachua temple and there was a speaker giving class and she spoke of this professor in New York. I think she said something like Thomas Hopkins. And she said that he was like a Vaishnava before Prabhupada came to New York and that he knew about the Sampradaya but didn't know about Prabhupada because when he saw the devotees in New York, he noticed that they didn't notice. He didn't know about the Sampradaya. They just knew about Prabhupada, but he didn't know about Prabhupada. I just thought that was so interesting.
Yeah. Thomas Hopkins, I think. That's pronounced.
Yeah, this professor, he specialized in Bhagavatam. So it was sort of interesting that he, even prior to Prabhupada's arrival, he had studied the Bhagavatam. And he wrote a book called The Glory of India. Yeah, it's still available. Then later he became friends with devotees and some devotees like Graham Schweig and others. I don't know if Dhayananda Maharaj has met him or not, but yeah. But he's passed away. He's older than us.
Yeah.
So forgive me for my ignorance because I haven't read like Chaitanya Charitamrita, but I just wonder about the Sampradaya. Like, I know it starts with Krishna like speaking the Bhagavad Gita, and then it like also starts with Lord Chaitanya, and then his disciples were the six Goswamis, and then Haridas Thakur like got all the information he could, and he kind of like revived Lord Chaitanya's movement. Because I'm just saying what I understand, so you can correct me.
Well, no, Haridas Thakur was a disciple. They don't really know whose disciple Haridas Thakur was. Some people say it was Advaita Acharya. Some writers have said it's Advaita Acharya. Some others have said that he's a disciple of other pandits or other great devotees, but it's unknown. But he chanted the holy name, and he appeared before Lord Chaitanya came along, and became very closely associated with Advaita Acharya. And they were both, appeared before Lord Chaitanya appeared, but they became his disciples, like his followers. And Lord Chaitanya, and through the six Goswamis, I remember once in Vrindavan, Prabhupada gave a lecture where he went through the whole Sampradaya from the time of Brahma, just quickly kind of went through it. And he said, and I have come to give the same message. So that's our parampara, that this message is repeated very, not spontaneously, but it's repeated as it is, but in many different ways. In other words, each individual has their own way of presentation, their own manner of presentation, their own style, you could say. And so Prabhupada, as he says, that's one of the main qualifications of the spiritual master is that he speaks what he's heard from his spiritual master. He doesn't decides not to invent anything. Just give the message as it is, as it's been passed down for thousands of years. That's our system. And it continues. Continues. It's been continuing for so many thousands of years. Go ahead, Presence.
Excuse me if I'm stating this translation incorrectly, but Bhagavad Gita 17:5, I believe, is austerity in speech consists of speaking words that are truthful, pleasing, beneficial, and non-agitating to others, as well as regularly reciting Vedic literature. So I was just curious about how that intersects, or like what the intersection of that with the Babaji statement.
Well, yeah, it's a good question. Of course, as far as possible, we want to speak in a way that will touch the hearts of others and help to transform their lives, if possible. But sometimes it may not be possible. If the truth offends someone, it's really more their problem than the speaker's problem. You know, if for instance, if you were to say to someone, "You're not this body," who's very much committed to being the body, you say, "Well, you're not this body," that may insult them. They may be very offended by that. Right? You're not, what do you mean I'm not this body? You know, they're very proud of the way they look and the way they do everything. But if you say, "Oh, that's not you," well, they may be offended. And if you speak the truth, some will be enlivened, and some will be offended, and some will be indifferent. I mean, that's just the way it is. You try to give a pure message, some people will be enlivened by it, some people will hate it. So I don't think you can, although you can try the best you can to speak to them in a way that will enliven or encourage them, but it's not always possible. That's a good question.
I just wanted to say one thing. I'm giving these out free, so if you really are interested in, if you don't think you're going to read it, please don't take a free copy. But if you read it out of curiosity, or if you're interested in environmental preaching, then please take one. There's a box here, and I'm going to be sending another 20 to Dr. Jackson. Or so.
Thank you all very much for your